What you're observing through all of this is just a reaction to being exposed as being a complete failure. This is a pattern of behavior. This is something that's happened throughout his entire career. Donald Trump is someone who has the reverse Midas touch. Everything that he touches turns to shit. And that's the bottom line of his professional history. And the fact of the matter is that what's interesting is that he is the king of projection. How often have we heard him point the finger at all sorts of different people about if you vote for this person, if this person's in charge, all sorts of things are going to go wrong. We even can think of a time when President Obama was in charge where Donald Trump was repeatedly saying that President Obama would go to war with Iran because he was not a good negotiator.
Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective. So the only way he figures that he's going to get reelected, and as sure as you're sitting there, is to start a war with Iran.
Isn't it interesting that Taco Don made that accusation and we find ourselves in the situation that we're in right now? The guy that took over after Obama's term tore up the agreement because he didn't like the idea of a black man having his name on anything, swore he would get a better deal. And here we are 10 years later with no deal and on the brink of war because this guy is so weak that he can't get anything done. And now what's he doing? He's trying to pay off the Iranians to get them to make a deal and probably sign a deal that is very similar to the one that he tore up. That is how big of a failure this guy is. We have so much evidence of us being warned about the failure that a second Trump administration would lead to. If his first term wasn't enough evidence, certainly all of the political commenters and even Kamala Harris pointing out the disaster that was coming should have been enough to get people to move away from this absolute disaster.
Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. People he calls, quote, the enemy from within. America, this is not a candidate for president who is thinking about how to make your life better. This is someone who is unstable, obsessed with revenge, consumed with grievance, and out for unchecked power. Donald Trump has spent a decade trying to keep the American people divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is.
And it's funny how the Trump campaign pointed the finger at Harris being the person that's going to get us into World War III.
A vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for Dick Cheney, and it's a vote for war, more war, likely World War III and nuclear war. A vote for Donald Trump is a vote for a man who wants to end wars, not start them.
How is all of that shaking out? In less than 6 months, we're looking at a disaster of epic proportions across the board in every segment of society. And that's before we talk about the terrible bill that's working its way through Congress. That's before we talk about the Supreme Court that is bought and paid for in the pockets of the billionaire interests, signing away their responsibility and saying that basically the executive branch can do whatever they want. Things are already at a stage where it's absolutely terrible. What you're looking at is an absolute disaster of a regime. This regime, in less than 6 months, has already demonstrated that it doesn't care about the American people. How many different states have been left hung out to dry with lack of aid to recover from the disasters? And that's before we get into the peak of the hurricane season that's coming. What do you think is going to be the impact of the shutting down of all of the weather observation services and early warning services that this regime has gone and done, all in the interest of making government more efficient? And what's interesting is that now that DOGE has less of an influence, their engineers are actually coming out and saying that they were surprised at how efficient government operated. Think about that. You have 40 years of Republicans, 40 to 50 years of Republicans cutting government to the bone and government is still running very efficiently to the point that their hatchet people couldn't find nearly enough wrong to justify them being there in the first place. That's the pattern for Republicans. They will give tax cuts to the ultra wealthy, steal and strip everything and anything possible that benefits the bottom 90%. And when things go wrong, they'll blame government instead of blaming the billionaires and millionaire class that are complete parasites of society. What you're looking at here is a gangster government that doesn't care about its people. And it's even evidenced by their actions in Iran. They go ahead and bomb Iran and then tell the Americans that are there, who are there for whatever purposes, that they're on their own when it comes to getting out.
We do not anticipate offering direct U.S. government-assisted departure from Iran. Americans seeking departure should take advantage of existing means to leave. The Department of State has provided information and support to over 25,000 people seeking guidance regarding the situation in Israel, the West Bank, and Iran.
You just heard Tammy Bruce of the State Department saying that Americans are on their own when it comes to evacuating Iran. Who do you think the Ayatollah is going to go for and look for now that there is open hostility and they've sworn revenge against the American people thanks to small d energy from Taco Don? When you take all of this into account, you have a regime that's a failure on the domestic front, that's a failure on the international front, is being mocked by anybody and everybody. And meanwhile, they are still trying to push forward as fast as they can. They're disappearing people off the streets, and there's serious questions about what's happening to those people. They're setting up concentration camps in Florida. They're making transportation arrangements for these people that they're kidnapping and trafficking in cargo planes that are able to open their rear doors and are somehow not landing anywhere. Everything that this regime is doing is normalizing the type of atrocities that happened in World War II era Germany. And in fact, when you're talking about the transportation of illegal immigrants, these people are being zip tied and shackled in the back of cargo planes with no due process. And we have no idea where they're being sent. And this pattern of behavior is very similar to what happened in Argentina when a dictatorial regime took over. The first thing that regime did was round up the opposition along with the class of people that they wanted to round up and disappeared them by loading them onto the back of cargo planes and dumping them into the ocean. And isn't it interesting that we are now starting to see reports of bodies washing up on various shores with hands and feet that are bound and zip tied together and are washing up on resorts all over the world? I'm not saying that there's a connection there, but it certainly looks fishy enough to investigate. And would you really leave it? Would you really discount it, considering that one of the key officials within this regime, Stephen Miller, has said that his ideal vision of the US is one where there is a population of 100 million people and they all look like him? No, they don't look like Timu Gargamel. They're all white. So when the regime has people in power that are openly advocating for genocide, let's get in the habit of calling what we're seeing what it is. We are constructing concentration camps. We're in the midst of committing an ethnic cleansing, and it's only a matter of time before the rest of us are finding ourselves in the back of cargo planes and evaluating how well we can swim with our hands and legs tied. That is where we're headed.